We now move to Leaders' Questions under Standing Order 36. We welcome Minister Darragh O'Brien and we call on Deputy Pearse Doherty, please.
Gan Corlia agus doubt be enough when realta shaw Yan and Crackish Yere Canarty Chiley or one canary tea tags Strahajagus Kai much stop or her shaw Tamalu toka a score in the Della Action Fain Honjeri or her shaw act and realtas egg jewel to agus a Coronatan and Malu Shin. Minister, last week it was revealed that an investment fund bought up to 85% of an entire housing estate in Balgriffin in County Dublin. And these were homes that should have been on the market for buyers, but were instead snatched away from them by investment funds that have the financial power and enjoy the tax advantages that home buyers can never hope to compete against. So in response to these events, the Taoiseach said he would look into this and see if more needed to be done. But Minister, you and I know that this was not an isolated incident, with funds snapping up homes at an alarming rate right across the city and beyond. Only last year, the Minister for Finance, Minister McGrath, was told by his department that hundreds of homes were being snapped up by these funds and that this government's measures were not working. Figures given to me by the Department of Finance show that the number of family homes snapped up by these funds has increased each year, with more than 620 homes bought under struggling home buyers from struggling home buyers last year alone. 620 homes in 2023 alone, Minister. And so far from what happened in Belcamp Manor being an isolated incident, there is a Belcamp Manor being snapped up by these funds every single 30 days. And that's what's happening, and it's happening under your watch. In less than 3 years since this government, half-baked measures were introduced. Over 1,200 homes have been snapped up by these funds. And these are homes that should have been available for workers and families to buy, to own and to live in. And yet you have decided to do nothing about it. You feigned action. Minister, in 2021, you yourself said, and I quote, "We need to make sure that we don't have first-time buyers competing against large investment funds." You said that it is not a situation anyone could stand over, or indeed that I, as Housing Minister, could stand over. But you have stood over it. You are standing over it because you know exactly what is happening. The funds are buying hundreds of homes every single year under the noses of first-time buyers. In May of 2021, the government scrambled to respond. In truth, your response paid lip service to the issue. A new tax was introduced to give an appearance of action, but it was a bluff. I warned that the tax was too low at the time, that it wouldn't stop investment funds from snapping up homes that should be available for workers and families to buy, and that has proven to be the case. And now when you're confronted with the facts, you decide to do nothing about it. This Parliament can ensure that a vulture fund never ever buys a home that should be available to workers and families to buy and live in. We can do that by increasing the stamp duty that applies in them and stopping this practice for once and for all. And that is the action that we in Sinn Féin have put to your government in the Dáil yesterday, yet you're opposing it. So the only logical conclusion that anyone can reach that this is a government that is on the side of the vulture funds, that this is a government that is happy for this to continue, that is happy for 85% of an entire development in Dublin to be snapped up by an investment fund and rented out at extortionate rents of over €3,100 per month, and to add insult to injury, they won't pay a penny tax on that rental income. This is a government, obviously, that's comfortable with the fact that over 1,200 family homes have been snapped up by investment funds in less than 3 years. A government that is comfortable with the fact that struggling home buyers are being priced out of the market by these funds. A government that is comfortable with the fact that these funds are increasing their reach and snapping up more homes than ever before. So, Minister, I ask you, how can you stand over this when you stood in the Dáil in 2021 and said you would never stand over it? It is happening in a scale that we've not seen before, and yet you're deciding to do nothing. Will you support Sinn Féin motion and stamp out vulture funds buying family homes from under the noses of first-time buyers?
Heachta also on cash and Kate she is Tashi Tavak the Gora Goriname Ahru Dli Planala and Taisagum Agat Fuishin me Mialtana Gavila is a Fahain Cosni and Tia Chowley the Dina Ainer August the Chowley Freshen Tan Tahru Shin Gober Taisaga agat faoi sin freisin, agus tá conail le ag breis le 10,000 teach inis gohfuil siad deal in éonar. And, you know, winning on ceis seo le tia le cead solar ahrí mé an dlí. Tá is agat faoi sin freisin. Ima thuramse is an rud a gahamid a bhreathnú a rais nó an coin in tíim leis sin. But it is correct to say, Deputy, and what you neglect to mention is that planning law was changed. And I changed planning law in May 2021. And since then, 40,000 homes up to October this year have the owner-occupier guarantee. What pertains to this particular case and some others relates to planning permissions that were granted prior to that date. That was the reason that the stamp duty change was brought in. So what you've neglected to mention, and your colleagues in all of the commentary through this, is that we have changed the law on planning, and that is actually working. What we need to look at, and what we are looking at, and is the rate of stamp duty applicable. Now, I think we also need to put this in context, Deputy, too, is if we look at the just less than 1,200 homes that have been purchased in that period of time since I brought in those planning changes that relate to planning permissions granted before the change in planning. That's out of about 125,000 property transactions, less than 1%. Less than 1%. So the planning changes are working. And that 1,200 homes is actually equivalent to the 1,200 homes that in one town alone, in Fingal, that your party objected to in Donabate, and your party colleague is in the front row there. So let's talk about context here. We're for first-time buyers. We've measures to help first-time buyers, like the Help to Buy grant, like the First Home Scheme, like the vacancy grant that you and your party would abolish all of them. You say you're for first-time buyers, Deputy, but in every single measure you bring forward, the measures that are actually working, like the First Home Scheme, nearly 8,000 registrations there, 42,500 families who've actually got their own tax back for their deposits. Sinn Féin would abolish it. And there seems to be a little bit of conflict between your housing spokesperson and your party leader on this, because your housing spokesperson says he'd get rid of them straight away. Your party leader then says quietly, when she's talking to people, well, there'll be no cliff edge. The reality of it is, deputies, more first-time buyers are now buying properties, 600 a week drawing down their mortgages now, the highest rate since 2007. And also, it may disappoint you to know, Deputy, that later on today we'll publish the commencement figures for new homes for December. And it was 3,167 commencement notices received in December, 76% increase on the previous December. And that's actually the highest December commencements on record ever. And what that means is 32,000 homes in the last 12 months have been started. That is progress, Deputy. Progress on new housing delivery, social housing being delivered at a rate that we haven't seen in over 50 years, affordable homes for people for the first time in a generation, and first-time buyers being able to buy. So whilst it does certainly anger me to see 46 homes sold in Belcamp, 46 homes there sold in Belcamp, that related to planning permission that was granted in 2019. And someone who will be familiar with the law, I would expect, Deputy, yourself being a member of this House for quite some time, will understand that those retrospective changes to granted planning permissions cannot be made. You don't want to say that, but 40,000 homes have been protected by the owner-occupier guarantee. And what I will be doing in relation to the stamp duty level, that is something that does need to be reviewed. Absolutely. But let's put this in context. You're saying there's a Belcamp Manor every week. There's not.
Thank you, Deputy.
Okay? 125,000 property transactions. About 1,000 properties purchased there. Less than 1%, Deputy. We back first-time buyers, you don't.
Deputy.
Minister, you can huff and puff all you want. There is a Belcamp Manor happening every month under your watch. You know it. The figures stand over exactly what I'm saying. There was 623 homes bought by vulture funds, bought by investment funds last year alone. That is the equivalent of a Belcamp Manor every single month. The majority of those purchases are in the region of Dublin. 70% of completions last year, in the first 9 months of last year, are apartments. You've exempted apartments from all of your planning regulations and stamp duties. Vulture funds are free to go in and buy as many apartments as they wish under this government. In terms of houses that were completed in the first 9 months in Dublin, it was just over 2,600 homes. Some of those were social homes, so would never be on the market in the first place for ordinary buyers. Yet vulture funds bought 623 homes, and you try and pretend that this is a small impact, less less than 1%. It is nothing like it. It has having a significant impact in the Dublin market. And you told us that you would not stand over it. You know about this. Belcamp Manor is no surprise. Your minister was told in the tax strategy papers last summer that this was happening in the scale of hundreds. Your minister was told that the tax measure wasn't working. So the solution is, Sinn Féin have argued back in 2020 to increase stamp duty on vulture funds to a point where they will not do this. We have a motion before the Dáil. You're voting against it. You're feigning outrage. You're feigning that you will do something. You're voting against the solution that will stop vulture funds buying these properties from first-time buyers.
I've simply given you the facts, okay? The facts. Relax, Thomas, for a second. I've given you the facts. No one wants to see family homes being purchased. That's why I made the planning changes. And whether you like it or not, those planning changes are working, because we have over 40,000 planning permissions granted now with owner-occupier guarantee on them, which means they cannot be sold on a bulk basis. That's working. Why are 600 first-time buyers able to buy properties a week and drawing down their mortgages at the moment? You might answer that. Why they're able to do it is because of the support the government are giving. Now, we will look at this tax measure, and I think we should. But let's not say that this is an issue that is predominant right the way across the country. You've got to put it in context, Deputy. It's 1% of all property transactions. Now, we're investing as a state €5 billion in housing this year. Every single measure that we brought forward on housing you've opposed. The Land Development Agency you've opposed, right the way through. Sorry, they have actually, Thomas. And look, whether you like it or not, commencements are up, completions are up. We're going to exceed our target for 2023 as we did in 2022. There are still issues there, but this government backs first-time buyers.
Thank you,
you don't.
Minister.
All you do for first-time buyers is every measure that's there to support them, you'd abolish. So maybe, and then your party leader comes up with this great plan of dropping every house to 300,000. And Louise O'Reilly was asked on TV last week, how would that be done? She huffed and puffed through that. No one's actually told me. You might use your time when you come back in afterwards to explain to the House the Sinn Féin plan to drop house prices to 300,000.
Right,
how it would work and how long it would take you. You might explain that.
Please.
Finance spokesperson.
Can
Please
we
tell
a little
us.
order, please? Deputy Holly Kearns.
Minister, last year, more than 21,000 Irish citizens were granted Australian working holiday visas. This was the highest recorded figure in 16 years. Even during the 2008 crash, just 12,847 visas for Australia were issued. So a figure of 21,000 last year, when we have full employment in this country, is extraordinary. And it's something we should be talking about in this House, because clearly it is no country for young people, and those young people are now voting with their feet. Many of them don't want to leave, but they feel they have no other choice if they don't want to spend their entire 20s and 30s, even into their 40s, living in their childhood bedrooms while their life is passing them by. Minister, increasingly people just have no hope for their housing prospects in Ireland. Rents have doubled in the past decade. Young people simply cannot afford them. And record house prices means dreams of home ownership are long gone. Minister, housing is more than an investment vehicle. It's about more than bricks and mortar. It's about independence. It's about security. It's about relationships. It's about starting a family. It's the foundation for so much that is central to a happy life. But that foundation is missing now for an entire generation. Minister, how do you think that it feels for those people and for their parents when your approach is tried, tested, and it has failed, and you consistently just come in here in a state of denial, making promises that are later broken, setting targets that aren't met? We've now heard promises for years that things will get better. And then simultaneously, we see things like the reports that an investment fund bought up 85% of the homes in Dublin in a housing estate. Just the latest example that things aren't changing. The flippant attitude of you and your government towards this speaks volumes. Government TDs have spent the last week downplaying it. You just did the same there. But the fact that you haven't bothered to close such a gaping loophole tells us all we need to know about where your priorities lie. And it's not with vulnerable renters or struggling first-time buyers who obviously cannot compete with €800 million funds that are cashing in on a crisis. Those 46 homes in Dublin are now on the rental market for €3,000 €125 per month. That's rent of €37,500 a year. This is why 21,000 young people left this country to go to Australia last year. This is why it's obvious to everyone that your approach isn't working. This is why people have run out of hope. It's my belief that the only thing that will change this is a change in government, but perhaps you'll prove us wrong. Your 10% stamp duty on the bulk purchase of homes is clearly no disincentive to funds that are making super profits from a housing crisis. Sinn Féin's proposal to increase it to 17% won't work either. It's too weak. My colleague Cian O'Callaghan has put down an amendment to increase stamp duty on bulk purchase homes to 100%. It's an effective ban. What we need is an effective ban on the bulk purchase of homes. Will you do that and make some effort to at least deal with that low-hanging fruit?
Minister.
Thanks, Deputy. Firstly, just reject your assertion that in any way, shape or form we deal with housing in a flippant way. We certainly do not. We're very serious about it. This government's investing more than any previous government has in housing. We brought forward measures to help in housing. What I'd say to you as well, that whilst people do travel, and in Australia, if you've read about the housing situation in Australia and the cost of housing and the cost of rents in Australia, it's far worse than here. Deputy, 30,000 Irish citizens came back last year as well. You neglected to say that. And the measures we brought forward, like the Affordable Housing Act, which actually legislated for cost rental, and cost rental now, we've thousands of tenancies actually approved. Cost rental didn't exist here. State-backed affordable rents for working people. Your party, I'd remind you, Deputy, opposed the Affordable Housing Act and voted against it. So you voted against that which established the Affordable Housing Fund, which Deputy Cian O'Callaghan will be aware of, because in the Fingal area, your party also opposed one of the largest affordable and social housing developments in the country. 1,200 homes in Donabate, 253 social, 253 social and private homes as well. So at every given stage, and then when we say the Social Democrats also will say we want to build on state land, we're building on state land. But when we brought forward the Land Development Agency bill, what did the Social Democrats do? You voted against that as well. So you voted against the Affordable Housing Act, you voted against the Land Development Agency Act. Okay? Then also you look at first-time buyers that you purport to want to represent. You oppose the Help to Buy grant, you oppose the First Home Scheme. So, you know, we're bringing forward measures that are actually working, and it takes time to turn housing around. And if you look at where we are with completions, that since we have taken over, and so we've come into government, this coalition, that by the end of 2023 we'll have built over 100,000 new homes in this country. There are still stresses and demands there unquestionably, and that's why we need to increase supply across all tenures. That's why last year we'll have built more new social homes than we've done in 50 years. Affordable homes for the first time in a generation. And in relation to renters, cost rental is taking hold now. We've cost rental apartment developments right the way across this country. And I've met those tenants, I've met people who've actually been able to get safe and secure tenancies there at minimum 25% below market. That's working. But the Social Democrats have opposed every single measure and every single piece of legislation that's come in here into this House. Cian, the voting record shows for itself. I still await the Social Democrats' housing policy or housing plan as to what you would do differently. The reality is we back first-time buyers. We back renters. We brought in the renters' tax credit as well to help defray the cost there. The rental market is far from perfect. I know that. Now, in relation to bulk purchase, you will also know, and I've explained to Deputy Doherty earlier on, that we've changed planning law from May 2021. Over 40,000 homes now have the owner-occupier guarantee in place. That's there. About 1% of properties, that's a legacy issue, have been purchased. And with the 10% surcharge applies to that. And I've said already in response to Deputy Doherty, that is a rate that should be reviewed and will be reviewed. But let's put it in context as well. Less than 1% of property transactions.
Deputy Kearns.
Minister, your defence is quite frankly pathetic. All you do is come in here and mislead the Dáil about housing objections. You know that what you said isn't true, and I think it says a lot about the absence of a real defence in relation to this. You try and bamboozle people with figures when you come in with your reply. Here's a figure. You promised 55,000 affordable homes in 2023. You delivered 4% of that by October. That's what the promise was. I'm saying you come in here and you set targets and you don't meet them.
30,000 houses in total.
You talk about putting things in context and, you know, the reality of how long it takes to build homes all the time. Everyone recognises that it takes time to address this, but this and the previous governments have had, 12 years of Fine Gael in government trying to address this, and it's simply not working. So then we come in here, you say, you're making no suggestions. I literally just made a suggestion to try and stamp out the bulk buying of homes. We need an effective ban. There's a suggestion. Other low-hanging fruit is things like tackling vacancy. At a time when house price inflation was 10%, you introduced a 0.3% tax on vacancy. That's feigning an attempt to address vacancy.
Thank you, Deputy.
Feign an attempt to stamp out bulk buying of homes.
Time is up, please.
There's two suggestions, low-hanging fruit, things you can do immediately. Will you do that?
I think, Deputy, firstly, to recognise everything I've stated here in the House is correct in relation to the Social Democrats' approach to housing. You tell me one thing that I've actually said that's incorrect, and if you can't, because what I've stated is fact. The reality of it is as well is that we brought changes into planning to ensure that the owner-occupier guarantee is there, and that's in place. 40,000 plus homes have that condition in place. There are legacy issues with planning permissions that were granted before that. I don't like to see the sale of family homes to vulture funds either, and that's what I've said in response to Deputy Doherty, and I've said already to you, is that the rate will be reviewed, and I intend to have discussions with the Minister for Finance in that regard. But you have to put it in context as well. You cannot catastrophise everything, and you particularly can't when you're coming in here when you don't have any policies yourself. Your party has not come forward with any suggestions with regard to housing delivery. And as in fact of 54,000, our target last year, Deputy, was 29,000 new homes. We will exceed that. And you'll see that later this month or early February. We'll exceed it substantially. For the second year of Housing for All, we'll have exceeded our targets. And we'll have delivered over 100,000 new homes by the end of 2023. And we know we need to do a lot more, and we're determined to do that.
Deputy Michael McNamara, please.
Ceann Comhairle. Minister, in 2023, 3,285 people presented at Dublin Airport without valid travel documents. In 2022, it was 4,968. Under Section 11 of the Immigration Act 2004, it is an offence to embark in Ireland without valid travel documents. Now, it would appear to me that that's a strict liability offence. It doesn't really matter what your intention is or what your reasons are. It's an offence. So in other words, if the window flies off your Boeing 737 and your passport gets sucked out, it's still an offence. It may go towards the sentence you receive, but it's still an offence, punishable by up to 12 months in prison and arrestable without warrant. To date, nobody has been one person, rather, has been prosecuted, I think, in 2022. So it seems that this is an offence that's not being prosecuted in Ireland for whatever reason. And the reason, what I want to know from you is why, because we're constantly told that we have a rules-based approach, and we do in some respects. Sometimes rules are applied, sometimes they're not. It's not clear sometimes why they're being applied and why they're not. But I want to know why this particular offence is not being prosecuted in Ireland, because it is leading to considerable disquiet, and it brings the law into disrepute if there's a provision on the statute books which isn't either prosecuted or isn't prosecutable. And I want to know what the story is around this, because there was a statute law revision done years ago to take, not that long ago, but to take various provisions off the statute books that weren't used going back hundreds of years. But this is a relatively recent piece of legislation. As I say, it's the Section 11 of the Immigration Act 2004. Obviously, Dublin Airport, I think, is in your constituency. If it's not, it's very close to it. And the majority of the people who presented in Ireland without all of these people presented at Dublin Airport. There may be people presenting elsewhere, but certainly Dublin Airport is the place getting most attention in that regard.
Minister.
We have a rules-based system, and those rules need to be enforced. There's no question in relation to that. I have seen the reports in relation to those arriving in Dublin Airport without travel documents. I think firstly, just remember, many people who are arriving and seeking protection here are fleeing persecution. And I know, Deputy, you agree with this, that as a country we have been welcoming, and we should continue to do that. In some instances, people have very valid reasons as to why they don't have travel documents as well. Fleeing some countries where passports can't be issued, travel documentations can't be issued as well. And so we've got to be aware of that too. But where people are seeking asylum for false reasons, and that does deserve to be prosecuted. There's no question on that. I know that there's been additional training for airline staff where people are presenting without documentation too. So we do have a rules-based system here in Ireland as well. And what we got to ensure as a state, we're seeing a continued increase of people wanting to live here and seeking asylum here in Ireland, that we make sure the supports are there in place for them and the supports are in place for the communities who host them. And I actually commend the communities right the way across the country who've, in a very short space of time, we've been able to accommodate over 100,000 people here. Many new people who are going to set down roots here as families are coming here. And they're getting a welcome, and we've seen some awful situations very recently, whereby we've seen accommodation centres and places that have been identified for that accommodation being torched, and that has to be roundly condemned. That is atrocious criminal behaviour that has no place in this country. But to get back to your specific point, that in relation to the laws that we have and the immigration legislation that we have here, it is clear in relation to travel documentation. And where someone is found to be breaking the law, they should be prosecuted, and indeed they will be. I don't have the numbers that have been prosecuted under the provisions of that Act, okay? And that's something that I can certainly raise with the Minister for Justice. But this has been discussed at Cabinet, at government level, and amongst our parties as well, to make sure that we have a fair system for people who come into this country. We issue work permits here, about 60,000 work permits a year for people who are choosing this country as a place to live. One wouldn't believe that that is the case if you're listening to the previous speaker here, that no one wants to live in this country at all. Many, many thousands do. Many thousands of Irish come back here. Many people from other countries want to come and live here. I'm responding to Deputy McNamara, if you don't mind. So, in relation to the numbers of prosecutions, you've said there's been zero under that. That's something that I will raise with the Minister for Justice. But we've ensured that both airline staff, immigration staff, and that are properly and appropriately trained to deal with people who are coming in who are trying to get around the laws that are in place already. But the vast majority of people who are seeking asylum and protection here, their claims will be processed expeditiously and efficiently, and those who can stay should get a welcome here in this country.
One is a requirement to have passports, the other to embark. The other is the right to claim asylum. I'm not saying that those who arrive without a passport don't have the right to claim asylum. They do, but they are still subject to the laws of the land while claiming asylum, including the requirement to present a passport on arrival. Now, it may be that people flee countries, it certainly is the case that people flee countries without passports. Very many, millions of people all over the world, but they don't get on a flight to Dublin without a passport. I think we all know that. So my question is not, why are people allowed to claim asylum? Of course people are allowed to claim asylum. That's our international obligation. My question is, why are people who are in breach of the law, a strict liability offence, not being prosecuted in this state? Who is giving the order not to do so? Is it coming from senior Garda management? Is it coming from within NIB? Is it coming from government? Because the law is not being applied. And that brings the law into disrepute at some point. Not why are people allowed to claim asylum. I know why they're allowed to claim asylum. We have an international obligation. And as decent human beings, we have a requirement to allow people to claim asylum. But why are people not being prosecuted for presenting at Dublin Airport without valid identity documents? That is my question, Minister, and I'd like an answer.
Minister.
I understand the question, and to say that anyone who comes in without travel documents, and you'll know this, I know Dublin Airport well, all of us do as well, that you will have GNIB officers and immigration officers that will interview each of those individuals who comes in without travel documentation. So no one just walks straight into the country. They will be interviewed. There can be valid reasons, as you have said as well, as to why people would not have travel documents. Now, at the point of exiting the country, one would expect that if they're travelling from another country that they would have had travel documents to get on that flight in the first instance. There can be security reasons, there can be personal reasons that people would not have that documentation when they arrive in Dublin. I don't have the specific answer for you as to what I'm sure there's no direction to say no prosecutions in that regard, but there are detailed interviews held with people when people arrive into our ports and into Dublin Airport as well, when they arrive in here, not just seeking asylum, but without travel documentation. Deportations do happen in Ireland too, Deputy, and you're aware of that as well, where people have found... Yeah, so what I'm saying to you is we do have a rules-based system. Those rules need to be and are actually being implemented. In relation to prosecutions under that Act, I don't have the up-to-date detail, but I will certainly get a response for you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Matthew McGrath.
This is good.
I was arranging the issue of planning the planning guidelines for cabins and modular homes and mobile homes. We're all well aware of the housing crisis, indeed we've been addressing it here, and we're all talking about it, but the situation where people have modular homes or have a mobile home, in this crisis, I've asked before for a moratorium for 10 years, but enforcement by local authorities of planning policy against these log cabins and temporary dwellings is just at the moment is very, very strong. I have at least a dozen cases in South Tipperary myself where people have been toughed out, been brought to court, been prosecuted for putting up log cabins in their own site, mobile homes, maybe extended log cabins in their own site. I'm not saying for reckless planning, I'm saying they're carefully constructed. These are modular buildings now, are very safe and very comfortable. And will you amend the guidelines? It's your bailiwick. As I said, the government can easily issue the government guidelines on rural planning, which we're waiting for, they haven't been changed for 20 years. And we're told now that the Green Party are insisting these won't happen. And while the guidelines stay the same as those outdated guidelines for rural planning, a house won't be built in rural Ireland for a farmer's son or daughter or anybody else either. And I think that's a shocking scenario, that the tail is wagging the dog to that extent. And I'm calling on you, Minister, to publish the new statutory rural planning guidelines and include log cabins within them. That's simple stroke of a pen. And also for you, Minister, again, to sign an emergency ministerial order, a statutory instrument, relaxing the planning laws for log cabins and accept them as a viable solution to the housing crisis. I have a gentleman, Sean Meehan, 66 years of age, and he has given me permission to use his name here. There was a matter of separation, and he bought his 5 acres of land, and he's built a log cabin on it. He's been in court 4 times by Tipperary County Council, and he was told by the judge 10 days before Christmas to have his bag the next time to face. He's been sentenced to 4 months in prison if he doesn't remove this log cabin. He's nowhere to go. Tipperary County Council don't have anything to give him, and they haven't his application approved for housing, and he's in a desperate situation. Just imagine that, an Irish citizen, and all these people are buried with a mile up the road, born and reared in the townland of Loughkent, and in Woodinstown, and he has a comfortable house there on his own site with his dog and his cats, and now he's facing prison, or facing sleeping under the main garden in Clonmel when he comes out of prison. So that's a bonkers situation. I'm not asking for planning laws to be recklessly abandoned. Have a moratorium at least, and you can do it. Because you won't publish the planning guidelines that long promised commitments in your manifestos for government, but the Green Party won't allow you to do it. But this man and many more like him, I have 12 others that have been prosecuted by the council. Now the council have enough to do to find homes for people, where people have the will and the way and the few pound together to do this. And I've been in many of them, lovely, comfortable homes, connected to their own sewers and their own water, not interfering with the aesthetic scenery or anything else, and being prosecuted. Could you believe it in this day and age? Being prosecuted. And Deputy McNamara said you can't prosecute people arriving here illegally. I mean, this is shameful treatment of Irish citizens, and in this case, Sean Meehan, and you sit idly by. You are the minister. You can, stroke of a pen, change the guidelines and introduce a statutory, instrument to make these people not be made criminals for trying to house themselves.
Minister.
Firstly, Deputy, look, I believe in rural housing. Last year, actually, over 5,000 one-off homes were built in rural areas, so people do get planning permission for rural homes. We also believe in ensuring that our towns and villages are rejuvenated. That's why, with the vacancy grant in particular, we've had over 7,000 applications where people can actually get vacant and derelict property, get up to €70,000, bring those homes back into use as well. Specifically in relation to demountable or log cabins, that type of property, people can seek and can apply for planning permission for those type of dwellings as well. I think you're not looking for. Just let me answer the question.
Please let the minister.
2.5 minutes left to respond to you. If you'd be quiet, I'll try and answer your question, and specifically around Tipperary. But so people can apply for planning permission for that type of dwelling. That's allowed. Now, sorry. Under what you have, you are also not looking for a blanket, sort of moratorium, because we have to have a planning system and planning rules in place, specifically in relation to Tipperary, because a number of cases have been brought to the Department's attention, and to look at existing dwellings that are in place. Tipperary have been asked to review the situation there, and a review is being carried out in that regard to see, are there ways that we can actually ensure that there's some type of standard around these type of properties. But every back garden in the country can't have a log cabin to live in. You can't just set aside planning law for that. But I am aware that there are people who've been living in these dwellings for a long number of years, where enforcement orders have been issued by local authorities. In many instances, they've been issued, Deputy McGrath, because complaints have been received by the planning authority from other residents in the area. So it's not as if, and I can assure you that Tipperary County Council have gone out looking for these dwellings. It's on the basis of complaints received in and enforcement taking place in that space. I have written to the Chief Executive recently of Tipperary County Council when some of these cases were brought to my attention to ask him and his team to review the situation. In relation to the rural planning guidelines as well, they're at a very stage of finality right now. Minister Kieran O'Donnell is dealing with that, and I expect them to be published very soon. And they're areas that can be looked at as part of that. Okay, so, you know, I think it's important to note that many of the enforcement orders that have been moved have been on the basis of complaints that have been received by planning authorities from other residents in those areas. It's not something that the local authority have actually gone out and sought to issue these orders with no complaints received at all.
Thank you, Minister. In this case, from Whitelands Cross, right up to Loughlin Cross, where where Dan Breen was married in a cow house there, and his wedding took place there in troubled times. Every resident on the road signed a petition supporting Sean Meehan to be allowed to live on his site in his home. So you're totally wrong there. And you promised in the last election, it's been again if faulted, that the rural guidelines would be changed. But then you didn't go deal with the Greens because that went out the window. The political promises have been broken, including a promise to change the guidelines. You're wrong also in saying that planning can be obtained for these. We have umpteen cases where they can't and won't, because the guidelines that you won't publish won't allow the planners. The planners might want to do it, they can't do it with current guidelines. You said now Kieran O'Donnell is going to do it. When will it be? After the Greens are out of government and long gone. You haven't the will to change. I mentioned to bring a man to court, a 66-year-old man, 4 times, and now he's also faced with, he's got 4 months in prison if he doesn't remove it. And if he doesn't remove it, the council will hire someone to remove it, and he'll have to pay for it. Just think about it. When we're trying to see tents all over the country, in towns and everywhere else, people can sleep in them. This man has housed himself. There's 12 more like him that I'm dealing with have housed themselves. They're looking for anything off the council. Be left alone. You do your job in government, but you're not doing it.
As planning minister, I'm not going to do that.
No
so
objections.
I'm not referring specifically to that case. I've already answered in relation to instances, this issue that's been raised specifically in Tipperary, and I've engaged, my officials have engaged with the with Tipperary County Council. The rural planning guidelines will be published shortly. A lot of work has been undertaken in that regard. They haven't been updated since 2011. But Deputy, the facts are borne out as well that the last full year that we have in 2022, about 5,000 rural homes were built. There are 5,000 plus permissions were granted. So to say the planning is not granted in rural areas is simply not true. It's not borne out by the facts.